what we're trying to focus on here are two different things. One is how duplicate bridge is scored, which is very different than how social bridge is scored. And the other is to sort of talk about the many differences between the many ways that social bridge and duplicate bridge are different. Even though they are exactly the same game, they are conducted very differently. And it may take 2 sessions to do this. So I just want to start out today getting right into the scoring and just go through how it works. And then if we have time to pick up on some of the other stuff, good. And if we don't, we can run another session. So I would encourage you, if you downloaded the handout, to be looking at that. What Ralph has up on the screen here has all the same information, but I don't think it's quite as easy to follow it. It's sort of all crunched together there, and it's more spread out on the handout. But maybe that's just me. So anyway, what the handout has, it says hand records for table 1 up at top. And we're imagining, so there's a north-south pair 1 and an east-west pair 1. And then it says, the bottom half of the page says hand records for table 2 with north-south pair 2 and east-west pair 2. So we got 2 tables of people playing bridge here. And if they were playing social bridge, they might be sitting right next to each other, but they would be playing different hands from each other. Each table would be dealing out the hand one at a time, and they would play it and then go on to hand 2. And you know, they're not going to end up playing the same hands. They're just going to be playing different hands. But these people are playing duplicate bridge. And in duplicate bridge, you have to have, first of all, you have to have more than 1 table. All you would need to play social bridge is just 1 table. In duplicate bridge, you have to have more than 1 table. And the more tables you have, the better. So 2 tables would actually be a very boring duplicate bridge game for people that play a lot of duplicate bridge. But it's the simplest scenario we could imagine. And if these 2 tables are playing duplicate bridge, they have to be playing exactly the same hands. Okay? They can't be playing 4 hands at one table and 4 different hands at the other table. They have to be playing the same hands. And I'm referring to the hands, not as hands, but as boards. Board 1, board 2, board 3, board 4. So each one of those tables is playing those 4 boards. How can that happen? Well, maybe we have 2 sets of boards and we've dealt out exactly the same 4 hands for each table. Or maybe we only have 4 boards and they're just going to share the boards. So table 1 is going to play board 1, and then while they're playing board 1, table 2 is going to be playing board 2. And then they're going to switch when they're both done. And table 1 is going to play board 2, and table 2 is going to play board 1. You know, so there's different ways we could accomplish this. But the point is, they are going to play exactly, you know, by the time we finish with this duplicate bridge game, both tables are going to have played the 4 same boards. Okay. So that's what we're imagining has happened here. I've given you the contract that each table played when they played the board. I've given you the result, and I've given you the score that they got as a function of doing that. And in duplicate bridge, that score that they earned is going to be converted into a thing we call match points. So in red, the 2 far columns to the right in red are what we call match points. And when you convert to match points, what you do is you take the raw score and you convert it down to a much simpler number to keep track of, which is called a match point. So match points, MPs there means match points. And I guess one of the first things I should say is don't confuse match points with master points, right? Which also has an MP. Master points are an award you can get from playing in a duplicate bridge game that you have done well in. It is based on the match points you've won, but it is different, okay? So we're not, the MPs we're talking about here are not award, they're not master points, they're match points. So let's look at table one. When table one played board one, the contract was 4 hearts by North, and we're imagining they made 4, right? Underneath board one, it says none, right? See where it says none right under board one? Board one is hand one, right? We call it board one because in order to accomplish this, when you're playing duplicate bridge, the hand comes to you in a board. Somebody has dealt the hand out in advance, and the board is about 1 foot long, it's a few inches wide, it's got 4 little slots in it, and somebody deals out a hand and puts the north hand, puts each hand in a slot. So when you're playing duplicate bridge, somebody doesn't pick up a deck of cards and deal them. What happens is a board arrives at your table that you're going to play, and North takes the north hand out of that board and South takes the south hand and so on. Everybody takes their hand, and they have to keep the hand together in the process of playing it so they can put it back in the board exactly, intact, because that board's going to go to another table so they can play that same hand. Okay. So anyway, board one came to this table, everybody took out their hands, they bid and played the hand, and North-South made 4 hearts. None means they were not vulnerable. So they get, for making game, they get 30 points a trick, 4 times 30 is 120, and they get a bonus score of 300. If they were vulnerable, they would get a bonus score of 500. So that's where you came up with the 420. East-West doesn't get any score on that. They didn't make the contract. Under East-West, I've got 420 written too in parentheses. If you're playing duplicate bridge, actually, East-West has a score now of minus 420 on that board. If North-South has a plus 420, East-West has a minus 420, which sounds awful. But they might win with that minus 420 because they're not competing against North-South. They're competing against the East-West pair sitting at table 2. Think about that for a minute. When you play duplicate bridge, you are playing the hand against one pair of people, and you are trying to do as well as you can, but they're not the pair you're trying to beat. You're trying to beat the people sitting at the table next to you who are sitting in the same direction you are. You're trying to do better than them. So the people you're playing your hand against are getting in your way. You're obviously trying to do as well as you can, but they're not the people you're competing against. Okay? You're competing against everyone else that plays that same hand, sitting in the same direction you are. And obviously, if you do poorly against the people you're playing the hand against, your chances of coming out well against the people you're competing against are not good. But there are actually 2 other pairs in a way that you're playing against when you play duplicate bridge. Okay, so just in terms of that table, at table 1, on board 1, who won, North-South or East-West?
North-South.
North-South, right? They got 420. If they're playing for 1/10 of a cent a point, social bridge, And when you're playing social bridge for money, it might not be all that social. It might get pretty competitive, right? Social bridge can be competitive. If they're playing social bridge for money, 1/10 of a cent a point, East-West owes North-South 42 cents already. Okay, they lost that hand to North-South, but did they lose it to the pair they're competing against, which is the East-West pair at table 2? Well, let's look down and find out. What happened at table 2 for board 1? The contract was only 3 hearts by North-South. They didn't bid game. They made game, but they didn't bid game, right? So they've got a score not of 420, but of 170. 4 times 30 is 120. That's their score for the tricks they took. But their bonus is only 50 because they only made a part score contract. So they've got a score of 170. Okay. Just looking at that table, who won, North-South or East-West? Just at table 2. North-South, right?
North-South, yeah.
They got a score of 170, okay? They beat East-West, but East-West only owes them 17 cents if they're playing for 1/10 of a cent a point, right? But they beat them. They beat East-West, not as badly as North-South beat them at table 1, but they beat them, okay? If these two tables are playing duplicate bridge, which means those two board 1s were exactly the same, now let's see who won the duplicate competition. In duplicate bridge, you get 1 master point. You look at how did you do compared to the other people sitting your direction who played that hand. And you get 1 master point for each pair you beat, 1/2 a master point for each pair you tie. And if the other pair beats you, you don't get anything. So I have given North-South up there at table 1, 1 master point because their score of 420 beat North-South score at table 2 of 170, right? So they get a master point, okay? The North-South pair at table 2 gets no master points. So who won the North-South competition? Board 1 or table 1 or table 2?
Table 1.
Table 1, right? Now let's look at East-West, okay? Which East-West got the best score? Well,
Table 2.
table 1 had minus 420, right? Table 2 East-West had minus 170. Well, minus 170 isn't so hot, but it's a lot better than minus 420, right? East-West at table 2 gets a master point. They beat East-West at table 1 on that particular board. They didn't have a very good score, minus 170. I mean, actually, they got 0, really. They didn't get any score on that. But their 0 earned them a master point because they lost by less than East-West lost by at table 1. Okay. See how that works? So let's say I'm an East-West player and I play board 1. I'm an East-West player sitting at table 1 and we play board 1. And I think, oh, wow, North-South is out in front of us by 420 already. Okay. If we're playing social bridge, I'm not very happy about that. If I'm East-West sitting at table 2, I'm thinking, well, after one hand, North-South is ahead of us by 170 already. That's not so hot either, but I'm glad they didn't bid game because they'd be ahead by even more. But wait a minute. I might have won, right? Because I'm not competing against north-south. I'm competing against east-west at the other table. You can sit down and play bridge all day. You know, you can sit down and play 20 hands of bridge, and you can have rotten cards sitting east-west, and you can have rotten cards every time. And if you're playing social bridge, you walk home thinking, I should have gone to the movies because I had rotten cards all day. I'm a much better player. Partner and I are much better than the people we were competing against, but they had all the cards. So they beat the tar out of us. What can we do about that? Well, if you're playing duplicate bridge, that kind of thinking doesn't exist anymore. You can have rotten cards all day long playing duplicate bridge and win the competition against the people that were sitting in the same direction you are, because they had the same rotten cards you did. And if you do better with the rotten cards than they did with the rotten cards, you win. Okay. And that's the hook, that the main hook that gets most people interested in duplicate bridge is they don't have to walk away frustrated anymore. And they can't go home and complain to their significant other about how they did so poorly because they had rotten cards all day. Because guess what? In duplicate bridge, the people you're competing against had the same rotten cards you did. And if you walk home having lost and having lost badly, it's because you played those cards worse than they did. Okay. Now it's not quite that simple. There is some luck involved. Maybe you were sitting east-west, and maybe the north-south pair you were playing against are the best players in the club, and the north-south pair other people were playing against were not so good. So that would make it harder for you to do something with your rotten cards than other table. But in duplicate bridge, they also juggle that around. So you're not playing against, if you're sitting east-west, you don't play every hand against the same north-south pair. You play some hands against one north-south pair and some hands against another north-south pair and some hands against another north-south pair. So it's hard to come up with that excuse also. Another thing that might be luck in here, maybe you don't deserve to make 4 hearts when you play the board 1. Maybe you only deserve to make 3. The north-south pair at table 1 made 4 because, first of all, they overbid. They don't deserve to make 4. But then east-west played rotten defense and allowed them to make 4. So they might have ended up, with a high board there that they didn't really deserve because east-west defended poorly, right? So there is an element of luck there. But getting rotten cards all day is no longer a good excuse when you're playing duplicate bridge. And that's what a lot of people like about duplicate bridge. Okay, let's look at board 2. Board 2 at table 1. Contract was 2 diamonds by north. They made 3. 20 points a trick. 3 times 20 is 60. They get 50 for part score. They got a score of 110. What's the east-west score? Well, we can think of it as a minus 110, right? Go down to table 2. They played the contract in 2 no trump. Up at table 1, they took 9 tricks. Down at table 2, they only took 8 tricks. But look at their score. It's 120. Because when you play no trump, you get 40 points for the first trick and 30 points for the second. That adds up to 70. Add the 50 to that, and they get a score of 120 for taking one fewer trick than the north-south pair at table 1. But they bid no trump. right? Because they know that in duplicate bridge, clubs are for the golf course and diamonds are for your finger. You don't play minor suit contracts if you can help it. You play your contracts in spades, hearts, or no trump because those score better. So again, north-south beat east-west at both tables. But in duplicate bridge scoring, okay, the north-south at table 1 gets no master points because north-south at table 2 did better, right? North-south at table 2 gets 1 master point. East-west at table 1 gets 1 master point because their negative score of 110 is better than a negative score of 120 that east-west at table 2 ended up with, right? So on board 2, the east-west pair at table 1 won the competition. Let's look at board 3. 3 spades by south. North-south's getting all the cards, right? Apparently. 3 spades by south making 2. They went down 1. That gives them a score of -50 because it says east, east, they were vulnerable. That's what east-west means there. It means east-west is vulnerable. Oh gosh, maybe it should be -100 then, not -50. Anyway, forget I said that. They went down, so we gave them a score of -50 there. East-west score gets 50 for setting the contract, right? They put north-south down 1. North-south bid 3 spades. They only made 2 spades. They went down 1. That gives east-west 50 points, and it should be 100 points because, oh no, east-west is vulnerable, so I have it right. Oh, good. North-south is not vulnerable, so the 50 is correct, okay. Then we go down to table 2. They played 3 spades also, but they made their contract, so they get a score of 140. In duplicate bridge competition, which north-south pair gets the master point? Well, the one at table 2, because their score was better than the north. Am I doing this right? Yeah, because their score was better than the north-south pair at table 1. Which east-west pair gets the master point? Well, east-west at table 1 had a score of 50. East-west at table 2 had a score of -140. So the master point goes to the east-west pair at table 1. And then the last board gets played in 4 spades at both tables. They both make 4 spades. Everybody gets a half of a master point, right? So in social bridge scoring, if both of those tables were playing social bridge, east-west would have won big time at both tables. I mean, north-south would have won big time at both tables. Maybe because they're better players, or maybe because they just got all the good cards. But they would be way out in front. They've got a huge score there compared to east-west. In duplicate bridge, okay, what you do is you look at who got the most match points for north-south. Well, north-south at table 1 has a total of 1.5 match points. They could have gotten as many as 4 match points if they'd won on each one of those 4 boards, but they only got 1.5, and that's converted to a percent. And if you convert 1.5 master points out of 4 to percent, you get 37.5. Down at table 2, north-south earned 2.5 master points. So that's a total of 4. If you add 1.5 to 2.5, you get 4, which gives them 62.5% of the master points that they could theoretically have gotten. North-South came in first, okay, in duplicate bridge competition. North-South at table 2. East-West competition is just the opposite. East-West at table 1 earned 2.5 master points for 62.5%. East-West at table 2 got 1.5 master points for 37.5%. In duplicate competition, East-West won. They beat the East-West team sitting at the other table. Even though they got hammered on 2 of the hands by North-South, beaten on one of the other hands by North-South, and just got 50 points on the 4th one, okay? They came out first in duplicate bridge competition because they did better than East-West sitting at table 2 with the rotten cards that they apparently had, right? And that's duplicate bridge scoring. You take the raw score and convert it to match points. You add up the number of match points total for all the hands you played. Maybe you'd play 20 hands before you got done. And then you turn it into a percent. And anytime you get 50% or more of the total number of match points you could have gotten, you're probably, that's pretty darn good. That's sort of what duplicate bridge players are hoping for, that they come out with at least 50% of the total number of match points they could have won. And if they do, they're probably going to get, place and get a master point award if it's a duplicate bridge game that gives master point awards, or a little award of some sort, or maybe not. Maybe it's a social duplicate bridge game where nobody's going to get any awards for anything. All they get is bragging rights. But bragging rights are fine too. So every time you look at a scoring thing like this, you sort of have to focus in on it again and think your way through it. But you should be able to take that handout and sort of rationalize what's going on there. And maybe even if you ever play duplicate bridge, figure out why you had a good game or a bad game. So do you have any specific questions you want to ask about the scoring there?
I had a question for you, Vic. Can you explain the difference between MPs and IMPs?
Yeah, if your duplicate bridge can also be played as a team competition, okay, where you actually have a team. So you're playing north-south, you team up with 2 people that are playing east-west, and then you sort of combine how you do to get your overall score. And the scoring in team competition is, there's one additional step in it. You have to take the master points, the match points that you win, and convert them into, those are the MPs, and convert them into international match points, which are IMPs. So it's an additional step in the scoring scheme that you have to go through in order to score a team duplicate bridge game. And fortunately, scoring duplicate bridge is not a simple thing. Fortunately, we have computers that do it for us now. But my folks used to play, they played a lot of social bridge, some of it very competitive. And they played duplicate bridge occasionally with a group of about 10 or 12 other couples. And sometimes it would be 3 or 4 hours after the duplicate bridge, they had to do all the scoring by hand. And sometimes it would take them 3 or 4 hours before they had the scoring done, because you got to go through all these steps in order to get match points and percentages and stuff. And when it's a team game, it's even more complicated. So if Ralph is okay to do another Zoom session, I would like to come back to this maybe next week and we could just look at this handout very quickly again. And then I would just like to go, I think it'd be worthwhile to just go through the many differences between social bridge and duplicate bridge that are a function of how the scoring has to be done, that make it seem like a totally different game. The first time you play duplicate bridge, you think, what on earth is this game? I've never played this game before. It's exactly the same game, exactly the same game, but it's got a different scoring system that requires you to do a whole bunch of other things differently in terms of the mechanics of how the game goes forward, that makes you think, I've never played this game before. I can't play duplicate bridge. Yes, you can. If you play bridge, you can play duplicate bridge. You just have to have somebody that knows how to do the scoring. And then to figure out why you did good or why you did bad, you have to understand the scoring yourself. Otherwise, it's just a mystery to you. You're just taking it on faith. It's like punching in the happy face at McDonald's and charging the person $3.50, and because that's what the happy face tells you to charge them. But you have no idea what they just bought and whether you hit the right key or not. Okay. So does that sound good, Ralph, and other
Yeah.
sessions?
I think one other thing you should mention is that when you go to the club and you're playing duplicate, you have to enter the information in something called BridgeMates, which looks like a small calculator. And then after a while, that calculator goes back to the main computer, and that calculates the scores for all the teams.
Yeah, it does all of this for you. And you're going to get percentages that are, you're going to get fraction of master points and fraction of percentages, because if you get the bigger the game, the more fun it is. But when you get a big game, you end up with some hands that are being played only 4 times at 4 different tables, and other hands that are being played 5 times at 5 different tables, and maybe other hands that are played 6 times. And then you have to factor, multiply the scores by a factor that makes winning a board that's been played 4 times shouldn't count quite as much as winning a board that's been played 6 times. So there's a factorial thing you have to do that makes it even more complicated. So when you get your final printout at the club and it shows you the match points you've won and the percentages, and you get fractions, it's because the computer had to do some, had to punch in some factoring in order to make the scores on the different boards equivalent. Okay. But yeah, that's all done by the computer, which saves us a lot of time. So you're just putting, what you're putting into the computer, the little thing on your table, the BridgeMate, which is a computer, you're just putting in your raw score, and it's sending it back to the main computer, and then the main computer is doing all the calculating. And it's spitting out a number that you hope is right. And if it's not right, people will catch it, because there are people that look at those very carefully afterwards, and they say, hey, wait a minute, there was a glitch here.
Well, that's probably the reason you keep score at the table too while you're playing duplicate bridge. In case there's a question, then you can go back to your scoring card and figure out what went wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.